Father Ben Cameron came.
Oh, yes, right.
And he said two things that really struck me. First, you should pray and ask God to give you a religious vocation. And that really hit me because at that point, I didn't want one, nor did I like to pray. And then the second thing he said is, some people just pray and they never do anything. You also have to go and visit communities. You can't expect that God's going to drop it into your lap.
People often wonder who we are. Why do we dress this way? What do we do all day? Why do we live this kind of life? What does it mean to be a sister, a priest, a Catholic? We want to help you navigate life through faith to find the truth of God and all His glory, because the truth shall set you free.
Welcome back to our podcast on vocations, The Truth Shall Set You Free. And we are just so very happy that you are here to listen to another beautiful story of one of our sisters. And today, I'm very pleased to have with me Sister Mary Margaret. And Sister Mary Margaret is from Denver, Colorado, but I don't want to tell her story. I will let you, Sister, please tell us your story.
Thank you so much, Sister. I love to talk about my story because I'm so grateful to God for bringing me here.
Beautiful.
So I grew up in Denver in a Catholic family. I'm the second of 5 children. And actually, I thought of religious life, at least vaguely, from a young age. I loved reading the lives of the saints.
Oh.
And St. Frances Cabrini lived in my neighborhood about 70 years before I did.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
So I wanted to be like her.
That's beautiful.
So there weren't a lot of sisters that I saw, but when the Daughters of St. Paul would sell books outside of church, or the other sisters we'd see, I was always very fascinated by them.
Oh.
And when I was about 9 or 10, our new bishop of the Archdiocese of Denver was Archbishop Stafford.
Yes.
And so one of the first things he did was he invited Poor Clare nuns to come to Denver. And their monastery was about 2 miles from our house. And before they moved in, they had a tour, an open house, so you could go and see where they lived, see their monastery, see the boards and straw they slept on, like see their little monastery. And so my mother took me and 2 of my sisters.
Oh, sweet.
And we toured the monastery. And then afterwards, you ended up in the garden, the monastery garden. And there was the archbishop and probably the important benefactors, a lot of adult people. And the archbishop came over to us and he said, "Would you like to see the Nuns Garden?" And I was really struck because for me, it was like God, Pope, Bishop did this. And I couldn't believe that he was talking to us.
Oh.
And so he took these 3 little girls around the garden, pointed out all the religious, like the mosaics and the walls and the statues. I'm even more touched now that I'm an adult and realize that he could have been talking to the benefactors, but he chose us.
A future cardinal.
And so he, at the end, he said, "Now, have any of you ever thought about becoming a nun?" And so I think I was probably too shy to say anything back to him. But I thought, wow, maybe I could be.
Oh.
So we planted a little seed in my mind that this could be a possibility. And so by the time I got to high school, I decided that I really wanted to get married. I didn't really ask God about what he wanted, but I wanted to be a mother like my mom. And so I went to a Catholic college because I wanted to find a nice Catholic husband and get married and live happily ever after.
Now, during high school, did that seed continue to grow, or was it a little bit dormant because you didn't particularly want to?
I continued to practice my faith, but I think I wasn't really thinking about that. I was more thinking about what I wanted in life, not what God wanted for me in life.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite thing to do was to sing. And so I thought of going to college for music. And in the end, I decided that I didn't think I had enough talent. And I was also afraid that if I went and made it a career, that I wouldn't enjoy it so much, because that was my favorite thing.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
And it gave me so much joy.
I love music.
So I ended up going to Thomas Aquinas College in California, and I loved my experience there. And I started going to daily mass because it was convenient. Mm-hmm. There was mass before every meal, so you could take your pick. And there was everyone, or not everyone, but many people went to mass, so it was very easy to go. And I started to realize that, I don't really like to pray. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I would go to mass, and then I'd go to benediction every evening. I loved benediction. It was helpful. It was very short.
Sister, let me point out, you had and worked on the gift of self-knowledge. because you knew you weren't a very good prayer. Yes. You did not believe that you were. And yet the desire was there. And I want to really point that out. If someone says, I could never be a priest or a religious sister because I really don't like to pray that much, perhaps that's where you need to pray more for that gift. Because again, the gift comes from God. We don't do it ourselves, as we have already said. All good things come from God, and we receive, and then we give them back to Him. So that was very beautiful, Sister, that you pointed that out. Thank you. Okay. What did you do about this fact you didn't like to pray that much?
Well, I kept going to Mass.
Okay, you continued to pray.
I knew, or I was still dating a little bit in college, but I would go to all the events that were for religious sisters because I was still fascinated by sisters. And it didn't really seem quite possible that it could be for me because I didn't like to pray. And that seemed to me like a big criterion. So my senior year, I was writing my thesis, and I thought, what's going to keep me interested for a whole year writing a paper? And so more than anything else, I wanted to know, what is happiness? What's going to make me happy? And so I spent my year thinking and reading and writing about what happiness is. So I was reading Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas.
Sister, that was my thesis when I was in college.
Oh,
on happiness, yes. Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas.
Yes, and they were telling me that contemplation is in the happiness of God. And I thought, that's boring. I don't like to pray. But they were convincing me intellectually. And so that the first semester while I was working on my thesis, you and your sister, Sister Mary Teresa, came to visit our campus. No, actually, it was before you came. Sorry. One of the Fathers of Mercy, Father Ben Cameron, came.
Oh, yes. Right.
And so he was giving a vocation talk to men and women. And he said two things that really struck me. And he said, first, you should pray and ask God to give you a religious vocation. And that really hit me because at that point, I didn't want one, nor did I like to pray. And then the second thing he said is, some people just pray and they never do anything. So he said, you also have to go and visit communities. You can't expect that God's going to drop it into your lap. So after that, I go to the chapel on the campus for like 2 minutes every day. And I say, Jesus, if it's your will, please give me a religious vocation, but I'd rather get married. So I made sure he knew what I wanted.
Okay.
And 2 minutes was about my maximum of like private prayer. So I did this probably from October. And then in February, that was when you and your Sister Mary Teresa came to visit. And you invited me on retreat.
Yes.
And the retreat was probably 2 weeks later. And a friend of mine who is tech savvy showed me how to buy a ticket online. And I bought a ticket for 2 weeks later.
And then we had dinner that evening, and you came and sat with us out of all the students at TAC that were there. And you started by saying, and I said, are you coming on the retreat? And you said, I already have my plane ticket. And I just about fell out of my chair. Few people respond that quickly to grace. They kind of hem and haw around, sadly. But Sister, I liked your enthusiasm.
Especially because that was not, I'm a very careful person.
Yes, you are.
And I don't do things, I don't jump into things.
True.
So I was actually amazed at myself that I bought a plane ticket. Nor did I buy expensive things very quickly.
That's true.
So it really was God's grace.
That's true.
So my older sister at that time was living in Michigan. So I called her up and I said, Kate, guess what? I'm coming to Michigan in 2 weeks. Can you pick me up at the airport? I'm going on a retreat. She said, where are you going on retreat? And I said, with the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. And she said, I'm going on that retreat too. So both of us have been thinking about religious life separately and had never talked about it.
Oh, really?
So we both ended up on the same retreat. She picked me up at the airport, brought me to retreat. And at the end of the retreat, she asked for papers and she asked for an application to enter the community. And I was still thinking about my experience. I loved the sisters and I was really struck by their joy because here I've been writing my paper on happiness and they had what I wanted. And I could tell that it came from God and knowing that they were doing His will. And they were living out what Thomas Aquinas was telling me. But I also thought, I still don't like to pray. And also, how could two of us have vocation to the same place? That also seemed unlikely to me. So my sister entered the convent that August, and I got a job teaching grade school at a Catholic school in Denver. And the following February, my sister wrote to me. She said, "Are you going to come on retreat again?" And I hadn't been planning on it because I thought, well, if I didn't know the first time, how would I know now? And I left the first retreat thinking, I think I have a religious vocation, but I'm not sure it's here, and I don't know how I'll ever know. So I came on another retreat. And that time, as soon as I got to the mother house, I just felt like I was home. This is my home, and that Jesus was going to have to help me learn how to pray.
I think he can handle it.
And I forgot to mention that during that year, as I was teaching, my home and my school were about 2 miles apart, and in the middle was an adoration chapel that I had never known existed before. Maybe it didn't before, but it did then. And so I would stop on my way home from work, and I had raised my maximum from 2 to 10 minutes. And eventually 15.
Beautiful.
So I would just stop and I would ask Jesus to help me pray. And I probably just sat there like telling him how bored I was and how this wasn't any fun.
But you stayed.
But I would go, yes.
I
would go. And so that second retreat, I asked for an application and was accepted and entered that August. And my sister actually was in the community for 6 years, and then at renewal of vows, she discerned that it wasn't God's will for her. And I was so sad for her because I was so happy in religious life. But it's beautiful because she's now married and she has 4 children, and I can see that she is so happy in the married life. And it's beautiful to see 2 different vocations, and both of us are so happy in what God has given us. And I should add that I told you before that my favorite thing was singing.
Yes.
And about a year or two after I entered the community, I suddenly realized that God gave me exactly what I wanted, and I didn't know it. Because we sing every day.
Many times.
We're not singing for a career, but it's for God's glory, out of love for him. And so he gave me that great joy, what I had always wanted, not even knowing that that was what I was going to get.
That is absolutely beautiful. Sister, thank you. You have a very beautiful story. And I think part of the beauty of it, too, is for our listeners to realize that if a young person is open to God's will will be done. And if there's part of this is a preparation of oneself, but that desire to give everything. And also, sister, I want to point out something you made very, very clear. It's that determination to give oneself to God as God asks. And so for you, part of the struggle was you did not like to pray.
Yes.
And yet you come from a very prayerful family. I know your family, everyone is just so prayerful and so beautiful. But again, that fact of self-knowledge. So, sister, I think in your own story, you have given our listeners and myself as well so many lessons to be able to pass on to others as well as to take to heart ourselves. And it's just been delightful to talk to you, Sister Mary Margaret. And you just keep that radiant smile. Everybody knows you by your smile, and you just keep giving that gift of self because God is using that spiritual motherhood in many ways that we'll only know in heaven. So thank you, sister, and thank you all for listening, and tune in to many, many more because I have a lot of beautiful sisters. God bless you all.
Prayer takes a lot of work. And what I've realized that more and more over the years, and I always think of St. Paul's analogy of the spiritual life as a race. And he talks about how runners and athletes will train, to win a crown of laurel wreaths, but how we're training for the crown that's imperishable.
People often wonder who we are. Why do we dress this way? What do we do all day? Why do we live this kind of life? What does it mean to be a sister, a priest, a Catholic? We want to help you navigate life through faith, to find the truth of God and all His glory, because the truth shall set you free.
Tell me a little bit about your growing up, about your family life. Where were you born?
I was born in Dayton, Ohio,
Nice.
and I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and I was raised Catholic. So my parents, they were really good about bringing us to Mass every Sunday. They had a reversion to the faith shortly before I was born. And so they were also kind of learning about the faith as I was growing up.
Interesting.
And they were really good about showing us what it meant to be Catholic, especially by their example.
Can you mention anything about their reversion? Like, what was the impetus? What was the grace? What brought them back? Because if they hadn't come back, you might not be sitting here.
That's true. From what I remember of the story, it happened when they were both living in Massachusetts. So my dad's originally from up there, and that's where the two of them were living before I was born. And so they were part of a young adult or young couples Bible study, along with a couple who would become my godparents when I was born. And so the four of them all had a reversion through that Bible study and through the pastor of Blessed Sacrament Church, I think, where they were going at the time back to the faith.
Wow, how beautiful. So there again, you have college students or young adults?
Mm-hmm. They had graduated college and then gone and gotten their master's. So they were probably early to mid-20s.
So now they're back in the faith, but I like the way you express that. We began learning it together. Mm-hmm. Tell us more.
So one of the things I really remember from growing up that my parents did with us was during the season of Lent. So we didn't necessarily pray the rosary together every night or really pray together much as a family, but during Lent, we would have a different prayer or a different activity that we would do every day as a family. And Monday was always Catechism Mondays. And so we had the little St. Joseph's First Communion Catechism. And my mom would go around and ask us questions. And it was, the old Baltimore Catechism style.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was so, I just remember having so much fun because I tend to be very competitive and I love learning. And I was the oldest too. So I knew the most of my siblings because I was the oldest. And so I just remember waiting until my turn would come so that I could answer, why did God make you? And I'd be so excited just to get to learn the faith and to answer those questions.
Isn't that beautiful? And so your parents would learn along with you. Now, did your other siblings take to it the same as you did?
I don't think so. My youngest sister probably, we didn't do it as much as when she was little because, it's one of those family things where you do things more when the kids are younger and then they start growing up. So she's the youngest and we're about 10 years apart. So I think she would have liked it a lot too, though. But my middle siblings, I think they enjoyed it. But I think I was always the most religious, I guess, of all of us. And I was always the one where if mom was going to mass, I knew I had to go with her.
Isn't that beautiful? I was like that with my daddy. Now, sister, your youngest sister, she's the one that we think maybe has a religious vocation too, correct?
That's what she's been saying ever since she was little. So we'll see how that works.
We shall see how it works out. Okay, sisters, so did you go to a Catholic school or did you go to a public school?
I went to Catholic school. So we had a parochial school attached to our parish. And I went to that from kindergarten through 8th grade. And then we have 3 local Catholic high schools. So I went to one of them for my high school years.
Okay, 3 local?
Yes.
You're kidding. From East Tennessee, we have one, and the next one's 200 miles away or whatever it is. Anyway, you had 3 local Catholic high schools.
Yes.
So how did you decide which one to go to?
It was the closest to my grade school. So my grade school was a feeder school for that school.
Oh,
I remember my mom also telling me she liked it because one of the schools was it had mostly white kids went there. And it tended to be more middle upper class. And then the other one was downtown, which was farther away. But then also downtown Dayton is not necessarily the safest place in the world. And she thought, I went to Carroll High School, and she thought that Carroll was kind of a nice mix of the two of them.
Oh, that's nice.
So it would
keep
give
you
me a good
balanced
perspective.
and normal. Excellent. Did you enjoy high school?
I loved high school. Yes.
What was your favorite subject?
My favorite subject in high school was English.
English. Well, you are a good writer.
I loved writing.
And sister also loves Shakespeare, as do I, but I'm only a kindergartner in reading his incredible works compared to you. And we just put on a play. Tell our audience about that.
So we put on The Taming of the Shrew. We just did a little stage reading of it. But during the time of COVID quarantine, we've had a little bit more time on our hands. So there's been a group of us that's been just reading through Shakespeare's plays, just a cold reading and then discussing them and enjoying them and laughing at them. while we read them. And we really wanted to share that with the community. So we did a little bit more practice on this one. And I was able to teach some little Shakespeare workshops on how to act Shakespeare. And the sisters worked really hard. And we were able to put on a staged reading of the show, which was a lot of fun for all of us.
Which was excellent.
Thanks, sister.
It was very entertaining. It was very enlightening. And it was very well done. I do, if the tailor does say so himself. Okay, sisters, so in high school, what were the pros and cons of even considering very seriously a religious vocation? Or since you obviously had it quite figured out by senior year, but I'm not so sure that you did by freshman year. So tell us a little bit about how God and you together made those 4 years so important.
Well, going into high school, I was pretty sure I had a religious vocation, and I was pretty sure it was to this community. I'd only ever met the community once. My mom and my confirmation sponsor and I came up the summer before my 8th grade year to see one of our first profession ceremonies. Because I had received a mailing from the community and just really received a grace in that moment, seeing the pictures of the sisters and reading about our community's charism and apostolate. I just received the grace to know that this was where God wanted me to enter. And I knew that very clearly throughout my middle school years. But then when I entered high school, I didn't really have a very good relationship with God. And it wasn't at all that I was antagonistic towards the faith, or that, I didn't want to pray or I didn't want to have a good relationship with God. It was just too hard.
Explain. Why too hard?
So prayer takes a lot of work. And what I've realized that more and more over the years, and I always think of St. Paul's analogy of the spiritual life as a race. And he talks about how runners and athletes will train, to win a crown of laurel wreaths, but how we're training for the crown that's imperishable. And everybody in my family runs, where I'm not really a runner, but did cross country growing up. And I think that analogy fits very well, because when you do something like running or playing a sport, when you start, it really hurts and it's no fun at all because your body's not used to it. But then you get to the point where all of a sudden you go out for a run one day and you realize, I actually really enjoy doing this.
Wow.
And it's fun.
Beautiful.
And this is what my body was made to do this. It just wasn't prepared before. And I think it's the same way with a soul in prayer, where when you start, because of concupiscence and because of original sin, and because of just all the distractions in the world, the soul's not ready to pray right away, even though that's what we are made for. And it really takes hard work and it takes effort and it takes lots of not feeling God or not necessarily hearing his voice, even though he's speaking. It takes a lot of that sort of practice before the soul actually enjoys prayer. And so as a high schooler, that's not something I really wanted to put in the time for. And so I just kind of slowly, I think, slipped away from my faith because in my mind, there were better and more fun things to do.
Sister, you explained that beautifully. I like your analogy, which of course St. Paul does too. But I think that's so important for our listeners and viewers to realize that prayer does take work, as does anything important in this life. And that there are those moments that you mentioned when you realize you really do like it. There are those moments, even in the midst of the hard work, where the Holy Spirit just kind of comes and lifts us up. And all of a sudden we realize, I'm not really doing it as much as I'm allowing God to do it inside my heart. So, Sister, was there ever a time in high school that you doubted that might be your vocation, or was it more of a waiting till you would be old enough and then you made a retreat? Tell us some of those things.
Well, my sophomore and junior year of high school, that was when I really kind of fell away from my faith. So one of the precipitating events of that was at the beginning of my sophomore year, my godfather, which was part of the couple that I mentioned earlier that had their reversion with my parents, he was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And I was very close to him. One of his daughters was my best friend growing up. And so I hadn't really prayed a whole ton before then, But at that point, I really started praying hard for him. And then in January of my sophomore year, he actually died of ALS only 5 months after he was diagnosed.
Wow, that was fast.
It was. In a way, it was a blessing too, because most people who suffer from ALS, when they die, they can't talk, they can barely look. He was talking up to the moment he died because he went so fast.
That is very unusual.
It was a huge blessing in a lot of ways. And the other beautiful thing is that he was a huge pro-life proponent, and he died on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade.
Oh, sister,
so I know he's up there in heaven praying for the pro-life movement. But as a sophomore, I didn't see that at all. And I just knew that God had taken away a good man whom I loved and who my friend loved and whom my father loved, you know, and that I did not understand why he had done that. And I didn't really think it worth the effort, you know, to put in all this time and this energy into prayer and into a relationship with a God who let, you know, horrible things happen, at least the way that I saw it. And so at this point, I just started really throwing myself into my social life and into the plays that I was involved in. And I loved creative writing, so I did that, you know, and I threw myself into all that. So
your vocation was challenged in high school.
Oh, definitely.
But come senior year, you pretty much knew?
Yes. Yeah. So when I was a junior, I went on a retreat with my high school. And at that retreat, the sacrament of reconciliation was being offered. And I really knew when I was on that retreat that I had to go to confession, and I had to just make myself right with God. Because I was miserable.
Sister, I love that, because several of our sisters have mentioned in these podcasts that one or other of the sacraments, sometimes it was confirmation, but always it involves the Eucharist and confession, that the sacraments are the ways that we stay plugged in. And many times, as you just said, we reach truth within ourselves. We began by speaking about truth. And Sister, we'll be wrapping this up now, but I just really want to thank you for the courage of giving your youth to God. I think that is something that kind of flies in the face of the modern culture, that we should be selfish and self-seeking and get all we can get while we can get. And that's no way to happiness or fulfillment or certainly eternal joy, let alone temporary joy or any kind of joy. And so really, I just really want to thank you, and I want to thank your parents for raising you so well. And we'll see about your little sister. So maybe we will have another sister of a sister in our community, if that's God's will, and whatever is his eternal plan for each one of us. But thank you for coming today, Sister. And as a vocation director, I have to say you made me very, very happy that you were ready and, ready to enter, and actually fighting to be able to enter as soon as you graduated, which is a sure sign God has grabbed your heart and you're giving it back to him. So thank you so very much. And thank you, audience. All along our pathway, God is leading us, and all we have to do is just keep saying yes. And that's what we do, and we trust that he allows us to do and helps us to do in the hard times. Thank you, Sister Maria Benedicta.
Thanks, Sister.